honing in on the idea of the text is, as I mentioned, we want to be able to get as close as we possibly can to what the thrust of the text is about. And, you'll see that as you look at even different commentaries, some commentators will say this about the text and others, and there'll be differences on it, but there's a sense where there's the desire to get to what the thrust of the text is. And so as you work on it from week to week, some weeks you're going to be here, and then some weeks here, and some weeks here. Hopefully you'll not be outside that way. There would be homiletical hell. You wouldn't want to be there, but you want to be able to get the idea of the text, and once you have that, then you have something to preach. So, next comes what is called the homiletical idea. What we have is we have the subject, question, complement, answer, idea. That's your exegetical idea, and then you have the homiletical idea. The homiletical idea is the idea that you want your listeners to go home with. It's your, Don Sanukian called it your take-home truth. It's that homiletical idea that is what the sermon is about. So this is what you want them to remember. It's the thing that has Velcro factor to it, that it sticks with it. It has a sticky note factor. Whatever you want to call it, it's something that is something that you want them to remember. So from this idea then comes the sermon. So the homiletical idea is basically a rewording of the idea, that is, rewording of the exegetical idea into the present. But it has applicational types of aspects to it. For example, if we go back, let's just go back here to why does John tell his readers not to love it? John tells his readers not to love the world, because the world will pass away, but those who do God's will and love him forever, love him will live forever. Now, let's just think in terms of what somebody's going to be able to remember. Okay? You probably don't want to have a homiletical idea that's more than 15 words. 15 words or less. It's a general ballparky type of thing. Do you remember earlier today I asked what was the idea that was communicated in the Spider-Man movie? And it was with great power comes great responsibility. That's 6 words. And so it's not that we're trying to be reductionistic, but we're just trying to be crisp and clear and have folks able to remember what we have to say. So the question for us is, how can we be creative? How can we be crisp? How can we be consistent with what the biblical text is talking about in the shaping and forming of the homiletical idea? And so even with this passage, it's something that we want to think about. Of how do we get this exegetical idea stated into a homiletical idea that captures the intention of the text? And so that's something that maybe we could wrestle with at your tables for a few moments. What would be a way of saying this in a one sentence that is crisp and clear and communicates the intention of the text. Go ahead, just talk at your table for just a couple of minutes.
What did you say? That's
I would say down the six, right?
He's great.
Well, I mean, this is would be a fairly but put it in the second. Back in the slide. I would say, I wonder why so long. No, I think that's what it is.
I don't know about that table back there.
No, I was asking a question.
One of the things to think about are the features of this exegetical idea. What are some things that we want to be aware of that's taking place in this exegetical idea here?
He's talking about fleshly desires, right?
Yeah,
Talking
that-
about love not the things flesh.
Right, yes, yeah. What else is going on? Right, yeah, what else?
What about living and what's temporary and what's permanent?
Okay, what's temporary, what's permanent. So there's a contrast that's taking place here. Okay, what else?
Also talking about obedience, those who do.
Okay, all right, yes,
I think it's a reminder to the churches that he's writing to, which were, what is the 7 churches in Asia Minor, part of modern day Turkey. And they were under really pressure from within and pressure from
That's right.
without. So it's a reminder
Yeah.
that they're on the winning side.
right, right.
And there's something more to life than this life.
Okay, all right. So, with that in mind, go ahead back to what you're talking about. Just see what you can do in terms of shaping a homiletical idea that picks up the elements of this text.
Maybe it's because of your target. This focuses. I think the audience would say, well, I love your little change on you. I love what matters. Yes. Does it capture it? Good.
This is saying a last part.
She's got. You're 15.
Okay, well, let's come back together. And maybe no, all right. Maybe we'll try this table. Yes, let's hear your homiletical idea.
Go, Sarah.
Love,
Go ahead.
love the Lord your God and live forever.
Okay, love the Lord your God and live forever. Does it pick up the tension of the text? Tim says no. Well, why not, Tim?
It misses the part about the world passing away and not loving the world.
Okay,
Yeah, so it's,
All right,
or it's still one-sided.
okay, still one-sided. All right, how about this?
This is geared towards a youth audience.
Oh, a youth audience, I see. Okay.
So, older youth.
Older youth.
For a good ROI, invest in Adonai.
Say that, let him say that again.
So ROI before investment.
Yes.
For a good ROI, invest in Adonai.
Okay. So does it pick up the tension of the text?
Oh yeah.
For a good ROI, invest in Adonai. Okay. All right.
We'll make it a song.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, by the time we're done, we'll expect a little performance here. All right. How about this table back here?
I said, love not the world, but do God's will.
Okay, because one of the things that you want to be able to pick up is John says, tells them not to love the world, but to basically to love. There's a tension in this text. Okay. How about over here?
Okay, I guess I was nominated. I have love of the world is fleeting, while love of God is eternal.
Okay. All right. All right.
I guess I'm compulsively writing, so we had something like choose to love God. That lasts, but the love of the world passes.
Okay. Choose to love God. Okay. All right. Picks up the tension.
Love of the world is futile. Loving God is eternal.
Okay. All right.
Whereas.
Excuse me.
Worldly love is short-lived. Godly love lasts forever.
Okay. All right. And how about this one?
But this world will pass. Love and obey the eternal God.
Okay. again, picking up the contrast. One of the things you're going to see is you can get into the rhythm of doing the exegetical work and getting the idea of the text. It takes a little bit more finesse to be able to get the homiletical idea. Because the homiletical idea puts some traction on the text that makes it, in a sense, its impression on the listeners. And so when you're wrestling with the exegetical idea, and this is one of the challenges a lot of preachers have, is they stay in the world of the text and not deal with the world of the listener. And so how does this text deal with the world of the listener? And that is something that becomes part of the flow and development of the sermon itself. Always committed to the biblical text. One of my professors with whom I taught used to say, keep your finger in the text, keep your finger in the text. You know what I mean, right? Yeah, Ken, that was Walt Kaiser. Keep your finger in the text. And it's true, we want to keep our finger in the text, but we also keep our finger, or I guess I could put it, keep your finger in the text and your foot in this world. Because you're constantly challenged with applying that text to the people who are sitting out in front of you. And they'll only take information, factoids and so forth, so long. And then they think that they've then learned what it means to apply the truth to their lives, but it's only really information for them. So you have very fat-headed Christians, and their bodies are really thin because they haven't applied that text in everyday life. So it's a challenge to deal with the homiletical idea. And so,
Scott, may I ask you a question?
yes.
So, as you are drafting your homiletical idea, as I was listening to our contributions here, so are you physically writing this draft and then saying, no, I don't like that word? I mean, handwriting it out. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, like the work that I do with. Did you hear Randy's question about how do you deal with wrestling with getting forming a homiletical idea? It's the same with doing your exegesis.
Okay.
You're working with the text. You're writing things down, making sure that you're getting close to that thrust of the text. And once you have that exegetical idea, you go to the homiletical idea and you say, okay, how do I say this to my listeners in a way that they're going to understand it and see how it applies to them? Because the biblical idea, that is the exegetical idea, it's almost laboratory information. This is what it is. This is the idea of the text. But the question is how do you take that text and put it into words that people are going to be able to apprehend it and understand it? Now there are going to be genres and so forth that are going to be a lot more challenging, but all that's to say is I write down all kinds of ideas and think, is this going to be the best way to say this to my listeners? It's a restatement in many ways of what the exegetical idea is, but I want to restate it in a way that makes sense and also has this bluish element to it that's going to be remembered by my listeners. I've had longer homiletical ideas, they probably are languishing in the homiletical idea graveyard right now. But I've also had ones that really have captured the thrust of the text and have really made a difference. I had somebody, sorry, I can't remember where it was, who had heard me preach and said that they remember, and the person repeated my homiletical idea, and I had forgotten that homiletical idea, but the person remembered exactly what I had said because it was fashioned in a way that made sense to them and was crisp and clear. And that's the thing, you really want to work at it. Sometimes it takes more work to get the homiletical idea than it does the exegetical idea, because you really want it to, with your listeners. And so you don't want to shortchange yourself. You want to make sure you work on it and make sure that as we were dealing with this one from 1 John, that the tension, the contrast, all these different elements are there rather than going with the first thing you have. Because that homiletical idea becomes what is considered to be the roof of your sermon. That is, everything in the sermon, the movements in the sermon, that is the points, I already call them, I call them move statements, they hold up that idea. So they're connected to it. And so they're integrally connected to it. And so that homiletical idea can be such that it's going to be even potentially the shape of your sermon itself. For example, yesterday here I preached on my favorite passage, which is Proverbs 20:24. A man's steps are directed by the Lord. How then can he understand his own way? You can't. There are all kinds of elements to it. But basically, my homiletical idea is God directs our lives and we depend on him. So the first movement of the sermon was God directs our lives. The second was we depend on him. And then the third movement of the sermon was bringing them together as the homiletical idea. God directs our lives and we depend on him. And so oftentimes the homiletical idea itself becomes a telescoping of the sermon structure. Now, one of the things that Haddon Robinson emphasized a lot was preaching without notes. And that's an intimidating thing. It becomes even more intimidating for people who are starting to forget things as you get closer to 70. But anyway, but that idea is if you know what the idea is and how that sermon structure is developed, then you're more able to preach without notes. And so the homiletical idea is key to develop. And as you do that, it has the potential of really being a way of shaping the sermon structure as well. So in this case with the Proverbs passage I just mentioned, it's the third type of parallelism. It was a synthetic type of parallelism. It builds on what? So it's not as if it was it's a parallelism of a synonymous parallelism what we saw in the first example that we dealt with. It's a different kind of structure. And so I couldn't show that they were the same, I had to show how they were building on each other. God directs our lives, and we depend on Him. And so, the shaping of the homiletical idea is really key. But it takes some work. And as time goes on, it's going to be much more easy, I guess, comfortable, possibly. It's just something that may come more naturally to some. Some people are more creative, and they can come up with all kinds of snazzy-dazzy, that type of homiletical ideas. Hopefully it doesn't overshadow the intention of the text, but nevertheless, I've seen them, and it can work. So, any other questions? Yes?
How would you say the homiletical idea should relate to, and I don't know another word to use here, but the illocutionary force of the text?
Well, you want to be familiar with what the force of the text is. It's like I was saying for this passage that we're dealing with in 1 John, that it's an imperative. So I think a number of preachers defer or aver from being straight at you. In our culture we want to be very careful about that. But do not love the world is a command, it's an imperative. And but there are different ways in which you can respect that tone of the text in the way in which you don't have to be demonstratively, don't love the world, but you show in other ways what that command is all about. And as I point out to people, I don't have to ignore this for you, but I'm going to underscore it for you. That it says, do not love the world. It's a command. There are different ways in which you can respect the thrust of the text. Yeah, and being able to state it. So, does it make sense? Yeah.
I mean, if you're looking at the text exegetically, it's an exhortative command. So you can make a clear statement by saying, John makes an exhortative command to the church not to love the world. In order to make it clear and plain to whoever's listening.
Sure.
And then expound on it as to what is the ingredients of the text.
Sure.
Statement.
Yeah. And not only does John command that church to not love the world, but it's a command for us too. And so it's bringing all of that together to help people to see because you're right, there are a number of different things that are going on in the text, exegetically and elocutionary. So, and all that stuff, all those different kinds of things. So it's something worth recognizing when you're doing your exegesis, but then keeping that in mind when you're doing your homiletics, and how you do that in a way that's going to reach your listeners who are in front of you. Because you all come from different churches, different settings, different maturity levels in your congregations. And that is, if you were to look at your church and determine where it is in terms of its spiritual maturity, where would it be? And you speak to the church at that level, you see. And so all of those come through a pastor's filtering of his or her congregation and how you address the different issues and questions. Yeah. Other questions so far?
Yeah, you have one over here.
Yes, please.
So how, in thinking through this, I was thinking not only on this verse, but on the larger concepts that are found in the New Testament writing, specifically that judgment is coming. And that is how, whenever the apostles presented the good news, they always summarized it with judgment is coming, but God has an amnesty program. So this seems to be almost a repeat or a summation of the good news that these churches have already heard. So how do you, or is it right to bring in how this verse fits in with the rest of the unfolding story?
That's a great question, because what you don't want to do is have an exegetical lecture in the middle of the sermon. Because that's what people get really interested.
This connects to all these other things.
And people don't know how to deal with that. So the question for us is, how do you let them know about these kinds of issues, but not make it sound like you're giving a mini lecture? So, and it's just, it's a way of framing it than anything else. These folks would have known, and it's something that we want to be aware of too. Do you see what I'm getting at? Just, you don't have to give every little detail, but you certainly want to be able to help them to see what's going on in terms of the context. Because what often happens with sermons is preachers will give their introduction, let me give you the context. It is automatically, it's not necessarily an easy listen for some people. So how do you make this stuff come alive to your listeners so that it really does make a difference for them in understanding this text? And that's a great question. Yeah.
One book that I use frequently, the author states to put yourself in the passage. You know, so say we're dealing with that particular passage, you would, in sharing the context, you in essence including yourself in the passage, saying, you know, basically John was saying to us, or saying to them, that such and such, because they were in a situation, because in this context they were scattered. They were scattered in paganistic cultures, so they're being exposed to different ideologies and theologies, and he's reminding them not to be in the world, or not to love the world that is around them, or the lust of it, but to have their focus on the will of God. So, in the introduction, you can include some of those contextual trappings in order to set the platform for them, but in a way that is interesting and not mundane.
Yeah, there are a number of different kinds of angles that one can use to provide the kind of understanding that your listeners will need to hear in order to grapple with the text. And certainly those are the kinds of things that you want to keep in mind, is that how much information do they need in order to understand this text? And you don't want to have an information dump, but you want to be able to shape it in such a way that's going to, and there are different places in which, I'm going to share something a little later on about one approach that you could take to providing the biblical backgrounds and so forth, but we'll talk about that in terms of when we look at sermon structure. But the homiletical idea is rooted in the exegetical idea, but is stated in the present in a way that your listeners can relate to it and remember it. So one suggestion that I have for 1 John 2, what does John tell his readers? Why does John tell his readers not to love the world? Because the world will pass away, but those who do God's will and love him will live forever, is hugging the world is hopeless, but holding on to God is worth it all. There's this sense when you love, you embrace. And loving the world, hugging the world is hopeless, but holding on to God is worth it all. And so that might be a way. Do you see what I'm getting at? Is that there are images also that you want to be aware of that are in the text, that are in the exegetical idea. What's an image of love? One of them is hugging somebody. And so hugging the world is hopeless, but holding on to God is worth it all. You'll notice there the use of the words that begin with H. That is providing some kind of attachment to people's memory. Hugging the world is hopeless, but holding on to God is worth it all. And so there are ways in which we can shape the homiletical idea that will help us to be able to give a visual component of what the text is talking about, especially if the text itself provides a visual component. You want to leverage that. And so thinking in those terms, there's a lot of items to consider, but to think in those terms would be really, really helpful for you as a preacher.